1095, Pope Urban II delivered a sermon at the Council of Clermont that would change the course of history. His call to arms would launch what we now know as the First Crusade, a military expedition aimed at reclaiming Jerusalem and the Holy Land from Muslim control. Deus vult, God wills it, became the rallying cry of thousands who took up the cross, embroidering this symbol on their garments as a mark for their commitment. But the path to Jerusalem would be marked not only by military conquest, but also by horrific violence against civilian populations, including systematic persecution of Jewish communities across Europe. This expedition represents one of history's most complex intersections of religious fervor, political ambition, and intercultural conflict. The First Crusade's legacy continues to reverberate through modern international relations, religious dialogue, and cultural memory. Interesting fact: while Urban II's sermon at Clermont is often cited as the beginning of the crusading movement, no exact transcript of his speech exists. The 5 accounts we have were written years later and differ significantly in content and emphasis. Some historians believe Urban himself may not have anticipated the massive scale of the response his call would generate. This video explores the First Crusade, examining its causes, key events, and culmination in the bloody capture of Jerusalem, a complex historical episode that continues to echo in religious and political relations today. The First Crusade emerged from a complex intersection of religious fervor, political ambition, and socio-economic factors. Byzantine request for aid. In 1095, Byzantine Emperor Alexios Komnenos appealed to Pope Urban for military assistance against the Seljuk Turks, who had taken control of much of Anatolia following the Battle of Manzikert in 1071. Interesting fact: Emperor Alexios sent his appeal to the West through an Italian merchant named Peter of Amalfi. Originally seeking professional mercenaries, he was unprepared for the massive popular movement that would follow. Islamic political fragmentation. The timing of the crusade coincided with political division in the Islamic world. The Abbasid Caliphate had fragmented, with the Fatimid Caliphate controlling Egypt and parts of Syria, while various Seljuk Turkish rulers controlled different regions of the Middle East. These factions often fought each other, creating an opportunity for outside intervention. Papal objectives. Urban saw an opportunity to assert papal authority, heal the East-West schism of 1054, and redirect the violence of European knights away from Christian lands. The Peace of God movement. Since the late 10th century, the Church had been trying to limit violence within Christendom through the Peace of God and Truce of God movements. The Crusade offered a way to channel the martial energy of knights toward what the Church deemed a worthy cause. Religious motivation. For many participants, the pilgrimage to Jerusalem and the defense of Christianity represented genuine spiritual aspiration and the promise of salvation. Interesting fact: Urban II promised crusaders a plenary indulgence, complete remission of all penances of confessed sins. This revolutionary spiritual incentive effectively offered a faster path to heaven and proved enormously attractive. Socioeconomic factors: overpopulation, land shortages in Europe, and the possibility of wealth and new territories attracted many nobles and commoners alike. Primogeniture system: European inheritance customs meant younger sons of nobility received little or no land. The Crusade offered these landless knights an opportunity for territory and status they couldn't achieve at home. Before the main Crusader armies departed in August 1096, a charismatic preacher named Peter the Hermit led thousands of peasants, small knights, and urban poor on what historians call the People's Crusade or Peasants' Crusade. Interesting fact: contemporary accounts describe Peter the Hermit as small in stature with a long beard who rode a donkey, creating a Christ-like image that appealed to common people. His preaching allegedly moved audiences to tears, and some followers even plucked hairs from his donkey as relics. Peter's followers, numbering perhaps 20,000, were a diverse group including impoverished peasants seeking escape from famine and poverty, urban craftsmen and merchants, women and children, some minor knights and lower clergy, social outcasts, and criminals. Without formal military training or adequate supplies, this ragtag army traveled east through the Rhineland, Hungary, and the Balkans. As they moved, they looted for provisions and clashed with local populations who resisted their passage. A crusader fervor swept across Europe. A disturbing logic emerged among some participants. Why travel thousands of miles to fight enemies of Christ when there were Jews living in European communities? Interesting fact: before the First Crusade, Jewish communities had lived in the Rhineland for centuries, with some settlements dating back to Roman times. Many were prosperous centers of trade and scholarship that maintained Hebrew literacy and religious learning, even as the surrounding Christian society remained largely illiterate. In the spring of 1096, Jewish communities along the Rhine River faced unprecedented violence. Speyer. On May 3, 1096, Crusaders attacked the Jewish community, though most were saved by local Bishop John's intervention. Still, 11 Jews were killed. Interesting fact: Bishop John of Speyer not only protected Jews in his episcopal palace, but later arrested and punished some of the Christian attackers, even ordering the hands of some perpetrators to be cut off, a rare instance of a medieval authority punishing violence against Jews. Worms. Beginning May 18, the entire Jewish community was attacked. Many sought protection in the bishop's palace, but Crusaders broke in. Approximately 800 Jews were massacred over several days. Jewish historical sources describe mothers killing their own children rather than seeing them converted or killed by the Crusaders. Mainz. On May 27, despite Archbishop Ruther's protection, Crusaders led by Count Amicio stormed the episcopal palace. About 1,100 Jews were killed, with many choosing suicide rather than forced conversion or death. The Mainz Anonymous, a Jewish chronicle, described the community's resistance. Even women threw stones, and even tender and delicate women slew their children, for they concluded that it was better to die for the sanctification of God rather than to live with pollution and disgrace. Cologne. The Jewish community was initially hidden by Christian neighbors, but later discovered and attacked. While fewer deaths occurred, property was destroyed and community life devastated. Trier. The Jewish community was given the choice between baptism and death. While some chose baptism to survive, Rabbi Micaiah led many community members in ritual suicide rather than convert. Metz, Regensburg, Prague. The violence beyond the Rhineland to other communities along Crusader paths. The Chronicle Albert of Aachen wrote, "They killed the Jews, declaring it was the beginning of their expedition and their duty against the enemy of the Christian faith." Interesting fact, Jewish communities commemorated these events through liturgical poems called Seljuk, penitential prayers, and incorporated them into religious observances. These accounts became foundational to Ashkenazi Jewish memory and identity, establishing the concept of Kiddush Hashem, sanctification of God's name through martyrdom. These massacres represent the first organized mass violence against European Jewish communities in medieval history and established a dangerous precedent that would be followed during future crises like the Black Death. The main Crusader armies were led by various nobles: Godfrey of Bouillon, Duke of Lower Lorraine, a pious leader who allegedly sold all his lands to fund his crusade participation; Bohemond of Taranto, a Norman warrior from southern Italy with previous fighting experience against Byzantine, known for his tactical brilliance and political ambition; Raymond V, Count of Toulouse, the oldest and wealthiest Crusader leader, who brought the largest contingent and papal legate Adhemar of Les Poix; Robert, Duke of Normandy, brother of King William II of England, who pawned his duchy to fund his expedition; Robert II, Count of Flanders, known as Robert the Jerusalemite for a previous pilgrimage to Jerusalem; Hugh of Vermandois, younger brother of King Philip I of France, who arrived with a contingent of French knights; Stephen of Blois, a wealthy nobleman married to Adela, daughter of William the Conqueror. His letters home provide valuable historical records. Interesting fact: these Crusader leaders were not kings, but second-tier nobility. The monarchs of Europe, Emperor Henry V of Germany, King Philip I of France, King William II of England, did not participate, being variously excommunicated, in conflict with the papacy, or occupied with local affairs. Unlike the People's Crusades, these were organized military forces with experienced leaders. Their combined strength is estimated at 30,000 to 35,000 people, including 7,000 to 10,000 knights and infantry. plus non-combatants like pilgrims, women, and clerics. Their journey east followed various routes through Europe. Northern French and Flemish forces under Godfrey traveled through Hungary. Southern France forces under Raymond passed through Dalmatia, Croatia. Norman Italian forces under Bohemond sailed across the Adriatic Sea. Other contingents took various land and sea routes. Interesting fact, the logistics of moving these armies across Europe was staggering. Each required approximately 5,000 horses. Each knight typically brought 2 to 3 horses plus pack animals. The daily food required for a single contingent could exceed 10 tons, necessitating careful planning or widespread foraging and requisitioning. By early 1097, all major Crusader forces had converged at Constantinople, where Byzantine Emperor Alexios I Komnenos carefully managed these potential allies and threats. He extracted oaths that conquered territories would be returned to Byzantine control, offering in exchange guides, supplies, and military support. Interesting fact, Emperor Alexios was so concerned about the Crusader armies that he housed them outside Constantinople's walls and allowed only small groups of leaders into the city at one time. The emperor also impressed the Crusaders with displays of Byzantine wealth and power, including mechanical thrones that could be raised into the air and mechanical roaring lions. The journey east. The Crusaders' campaign through Anatolia and Syria faced significant challenges. Siege of Nicaea, May through June 1097. The first major military engagement ended with the city's surrender to Byzantine forces. Interesting fact, during the Siege of Nicaea, Crusaders tried to assault the city from the lakeside, but failed until Byzantine ships were transported overland and deployed on the lake. When the city surrendered, Byzantine officials secretly negotiated the terms and took control before the Crusaders could sack it, creating early tensions between allies. Battle of Dorylaeum, July 1st, 1097. Crusaders defeated a Seljuk army under Kilij Ursulan I in a surprise attack. This victory was pivotal but came at great cost. Historian John France calls this one of the most important battles in world history, as defeat likely would have ended the crusade entirely. March through Anatolia. The Crusader army suffered terribly across the Anatolian plateau in summer heat. Interesting fact, during the march across Anatolia, water was so scarce that contemporary chronicles report Crusaders drinking their horses' blood and urine to survive. The terrain was so difficult that men died, raving mad from thirst, and women gave birth as they marched, abandoning their newborns from exhaustion. Baldwin's expedition to Edessa. Baldwin of Bouillon, Geoffrey's brother, broke from the main army and headed east. Through political maneuvering and marriage to an Armenian noble's daughter, he was adopted by Thoros, the Armenian ruler of Edessa. When Taurus was assassinated in March 1098, Baldwin became the new ruler, establishing the First Crusader state, the county of Edessa, months before Jerusalem's capture. Siege of Antioch, October 1097 to June 1098. A brutal 8-month siege ended with Crusader victory, though they soon faced a counter siege by Kerboga of Mosul. Interesting fact, after months of stalemate at Antioch, the Crusaders finally entered the city through treachery. A tower guard named Firoz, possibly an Armenian Christian, agreed to let Bohemond's men climb into his section of the wall at night in exchange for wealth and protection. The siege was so long and devastating that cannibalism was reported among the Crusaders. Rodolphe of Caen wrote, "In Mara, our troops boiled pagan adults in cooking pots. They impaled children on spits and devoured them grilled." The Holy Lance. The supposed discovery of the Holy Lance that pierced Christ's side boosted Crusader morale before their breakout from Antioch. Interesting fact, Peter Bartholomew, a poor pilgrim who claimed visions led him to the Holy Lance, was later challenged about its authenticity. He underwent an ordeal by fire to prove the lance's legitimacy, walking through flames while holding it. He emerged burned and died days later. Some saw this as divine punishment for fraud, others believed he died a martyr. Battle against Kerboga, June 28, 1098. Trapped in Antioch and facing starvation, the Crusaders made a desperate sortie against Kerboga's much larger relieving army. Against all military logic, they achieved a stunning victory that contemporary chronicles attributed to divine intervention and the presence of the Holy Lance. As the Crusaders moved through Anatolia and Syria, internal rivalries emerged. Bohemond claimed Antioch for himself, breaking his oath to the Byzantine emperor and establishing the Second Crusader state. This betrayal deepened the growing rift between the Crusaders and Byzantium. On June 7, 1099, the Crusaders arrived at the walls of Jerusalem. Contemporary chronicle Fulcher of Chartres wrote, "When we who were in the vanguard saw the holy city, we raised our hands to heaven, and with one voice we gave thanks to God." Interesting fact, before reaching Jerusalem, the Crusader leadership sent envoys to Egypt, seeking an alliance against their common Seljuk enemies. These diplomatic overtures were rejected by the Fatimids, who offered only to allow unarmed Christian pilgrimage to Jerusalem, not Christian control of the city. The fall of Jerusalem. On July 15, 1099, Crusader forces breached Jerusalem's defenses and poured into the city. What followed was one of the most notorious massacres of the medieval period. Raymond of Aguilar's, an eyewitness, wrote, "Some of our men cut off the heads of their enemies. Others shot them with arrows, so that they fell from the towers. Others tortured them longer by casting them into the flames. Piles of heads hands, and feet were to be seen in the streets of the city. In the Temple of Solomon, the Crusaders rode in blood up to their bridles. Modern historians debate the extent of the massacre, but contemporary accounts from both Christian and Muslim sources indicate widespread killing. Muslim population. The majority of the city's defenders and Muslim inhabitants were killed. Jewish community. The remaining Jewish population sought refuge in synagogues, which Crusaders set ablaze. Eastern Christians. Some local Christians were also killed, mistaken for Muslims. Ibn al-Athir, writing a century later based on earlier accounts, estimated the population of the Holy City was put to the sword, and the Crusaders spent a week slaughtering Muslims. In the Masjid al-Aqsa, they killed more than 70,000. While this number is likely exaggerated, archaeological and primary textual evidence confirms extensive violence against the civilian population. The Crusaders established the Kingdom of Jerusalem with Godfrey of Bouillon serving as its first ruler with the title Advocate of the Holy Sepulchre. Crusader states. Additional territories were organized into the County of Edessa, Principality of Antioch, and the County of Tripoli. Religious impact. The successful campaign reinforced the power of papal authority and cemented the crusading concept in European consciousness. Muslim response. The fall of Jerusalem and the massacre left deep wounds in Muslim memory, eventually contributing to the counter-crusade movement under leaders like Zengi, Nur ad-Din, and later Saladin. Jewish communities. The First Crusade marked a turning point in Jewish-Christian relations in Europe, with increased marginalization and future persecution. The First Crusade remains one of history's most studied and contested events. Religious perspective. Traditional religious interpretations viewed the Crusade as either divinely inspired or as unprovoked aggression. Colonial interpretation. Some 19th and earlier 20th century historians saw the Crusades as early European colonialism in the Middle East. Modern scholarship. Contemporary historians emphasize the complex religious, political, and social factors that shaped Crusader motivation and actions. Popular understanding. The Crusades continue to be invoked in modern political discourse, often with limited historical accuracy. Historian Christopher Tyerman notes, the First Crusade established a paradigm of Christian holy war that outlived its immediate context and shaped European identity for centuries. The First Crusade represents a pivotal moment in relations between Christianity, Islam, and Judaism. The violence against Jewish communities in Europe and the massacre at Jerusalem revealed the dangerous potential of religious warfare and ideological extremism. Understanding this history requires acknowledging both the genuine religious devotion of many participants and the horrific violence they inflicted on others. By studying these events critically, we gain insight into religious conflicts that continue to shape our world. As historian Thomas Asbridge concludes, The First Crusade did not create an unbridgeable divide between Christianity and Islam, but it certainly deepened existing rifts and created new ones. If you enjoy thoughtful explorations of history's most defining events, consider subscribing to Historium. Your support helps us keep history alive, one story at a time.